When my husband slammed the falsified DNA test on our dining table to cast me out of my own home, he forgot one crucial detail. I am Gwen, 29, an Army Human Resources warrant officer trained to verify every single paper trail. He wanted a public execution. He got a master class in military-grade precision. The drive home from Fort Liberty had been the first time in 3 days I'd felt the tension leave my shoulders. I was still in my dusty, operational, camouflage pattern uniform, the heavy fabric stiff with the sweat of a 72-hour logistical audit. My boots were caked with the red clay of the North Carolina pines, and my hair was pinned back in a tight regulation bun that pulled at my scalp. But in the back seat, my 1-year-old daughter, Lily, was making those soft, rhythmic cooing noises that always made the rest of the world fade away. I had been staring at the text message on my dashboard mount for the last 30 miles. It was from my husband, Caleb, that asterisk. Don't be late tonight. Mom has a surprise for you. Asterisk, a surprise. For a brief, foolish moment, I let myself hope. Maybe his mother, Brenda, had finally decided to bridge the gap between us. Lily's first birthday had been the week before, and Brenda hadn't even sent a card. I told myself that people change, that family is complicated, and that maybe my deployment schedule had just made it hard for them to connect with me. I wanted so badly for Lily to have the kind of big, warm family I never had. I grew up in a drafty, double-wide-off Highway 210. My dad was a heavy-duty mechanic who spent his nights smelling of WD-40 and cheap laundry soap, working himself into an early grave to keep me in school shoes. I learned early on that if you don't sweat for what you have, it doesn't belong to you. Luxury was something we saw on TV. But Caleb's family, they owned Miller's Hardware, a small chain of 3 stores in Cumberland County. To hear Brenda talk, you'd think they were the Vanderbilts of the Sand. When Caleb and I got married, Brenda didn't hide her disappointment. To her, I was just a bro from the trailer park who wore combat boots and didn't know how to host a proper Sunday brunch. But I loved Caleb, and when Lily came along, I thought we had built a real foundation on our modest 3-bedroom ranch in Hope Mills. If you've ever sat at your kitchen table, looking at your bank account and realizing you heed the only Juan, pulling the weight while your partner treats your sacrifice like an entitlement, then you know the quiet exhaustion I carried every single day. I paid the mortgage. I paid for the health insurance. I was the one who pulled 24-hour duty shifts so we could afford the good formula. As I pulled into our gravel driveway, my heart sank. There were 4 cars parked on the grass. Brenda's pristine, cream-colored Buick LaZebar was parked right in the center, blocking my usual spot. Beside it was Caleb's sister's SUV and his uncle's pickup. "Well, baby girl," I whispered to Lily, looking at her wide, innocent brown eyes in the rearview mirror. "Looks like we have company." I unbuckled her from her car seat, balancing her heavy plastic carrier on my hip. The afternoon heat was thick, the humid air pressing down like a wet wool blanket. I carried Lily up the 3 wooden steps of our front porch, the keys jingling in my hand. The moment I pushed the door open, the cool blast of the air conditioner hit me. But the atmosphere inside was freezing for a completely different reason. The living room was packed. My husband, Caleb, was standing by the fireplace, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, his face pale and tight. Brenda sat on our floral print sofuda, one my dad had helped me haul from a thrift store, looking like a judge ready to pass a death sentence. Beside her were Caleb's sister, Valerie, and his aunt and uncle. Nobody was smiling. Nobody offered to take Lily's heavy car seat. "Caleb," I said, setting the carrier down on the entryway linoleum. My voice was calm, the product of years of military training that taught me to assess a room before reacting. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" Caleb didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, his jaw working. "Show her, Caleb," Brenda commanded. Her voice was a sharp, dry rasp, like dry leaves scraping across concrete. She adjusts her gold charm bracelet, the metal clinking loudly in the silent room. "Don't let her play the innocent soldier anymore. Show her what we found." Caleb stepped forward, his boots, expensive leather ones I had bought him for his birthday, clicked on the laminate flooring. He reached onto the dining table, picked up a thick, white envelope, and slammed it down onto the wood right in front of me. "She's not my child, Gwen," Caleb said. His voice trembled, but there was a cruel, practiced edge to it. "I knew you were sleeping around when you were stationed out in Georgia last year. I'm not a fool. My heart didn't break. It froze." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. I didn't raise it. In my line of work, the loudest person in the room is usually the one losing the battle. "Read it." "Et," Brenda snapped, leaning forward, her manicured fingers gripping her leather purse. "It's a DNA test, Gwen. A certified lab report. Lily isn't a Miller. You brought another man's bastard into our family and expected my son to pay for her." I looked down at the document. As an HR warrant officer, my entire professional life is built on documents. I verified DD-214's birth certificates, marriage licenses, and security clearances. I know what official correspondence looks like. I know the exact weight of professional bond paper, the precise alignment of automated letterheads, and the mandatory inclusion of laboratory accreditation seals. I picked up the paper. The letterhead read *Apex Genetic Diagnostics*. The font was slightly off-center. There was a signature at the bottom from a Dr. Robert Vance, but there was no medical license number, no state registry stamp, and the date of the analysis was listed as a Sunday a day when private clinical labs are closed. It was a fake, a clumsy, desperate, poorly formatted forgery. I looked up at Caleb. I looked into the eyes of the man I had slept beside, the man I had trusted with my daughter, the man whose bills I had paid while he figured out his next business venture. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He was looking at his mother, seeking her approval. "You really did this?" I asked softly, my eyes moving to Brenda. "You fabricated a medical document to brand my daughter. Don't you dare lie your way out of this." Valerie, Caleb's sister, chimed in, her face flushed with a ugly, vindictive joy. "We always knew you were trash. Gwen, you think because you wear that uniform you're better than us? You're nothing but a cheat. We're taking the house back. It's in Caleb's family name anyway." Ah, there it was. The house. The property had originally belonged to Caleb's grandfather, but it had been sitting in probate until I used my VA loan and my own savings to pay off the back taxes and remodel the entire structure. I had put $50,000 of my own hard-earned money into this foundation. But because of a legal loophole with the deed that we had never finalized due to my sudden deployment, they thought they could squeeze me out. They thought they could use the shame of an alleged affair to make me pack my bags and run without a fight. "You have until tomorrow morning to get your things," Brenda said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. She pointed a long, red-tipped finger directly at my front door. "Take your child and get out of this house. We won't have a liar and a thief under this roof for another night." My hands were steady. My heart was beating at a calm, rested 60 beats per minute. I looked down at Lily. She was asleep, her little thumb tucked into her mouth, completely unaware of the wolves circling her cradle. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even point out the 3 glaring errors on the forged document in my hand. If you've ever been backed into a corner by people who think your silence is weakness, you know the absolute power of letting them believe they've won. Just for a moment.
"Caleb," I said, my voice barely above a whisper.
"Is this what you want?" "I want you out, Gwen," he muttered, though his shoulder twitched. "The paper doesn't lie." I opened my mouth to speak, to deliver the first cold, hard truth that would dismantle their little theater. But before a single syllable could leave my lips, the heavy brass handle of our front door rattled. The front door swung open with a violent, sudden force, letting in a gust of hot summer air and the loud, rumbling growl of a diesel engine idling in the driveway. The door swung open with a violent, sudden force, letting in a gust of hot summer air and the loud, rumbling growl of a diesel engine idling in the driveway. Standing on the threshold was Aunt Clara. She wasn't my biological aunt, but in the trailer park where I grew up, blood didn't mean nearly as much as who showed up when the water heater blew or when. There wasn't enough ground beef to stretch through Thursday. Clara was 58, a retired Cumberland County Land Records clerk who wore orthopedic sneakers, smelled of lavender soap, and possessed a spine made of structural steel. She was carrying a cardboard box filled with fresh eggs from her backyard coop and a stack of freshly washed baby clothes. She took one look at the frozen tableau in my living room, Brenda standing like an angry queen, Caleb looking at his shoes, and me holding the forged DNA. And her eyes narrowed. Clara didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She had spent 30 years watching people try to cheat each other out of land, love, and legacy. She knew the smell of grease paint before the play even started. "Well," Clara said, her voice a low, steady drawl that cut right through the icy air conditioning. "Looks like I walked into a circus, and from the looks of it, the clowns are running the show." Brenda stiffened, her hand flying to her gold necklace. "Clara, this is a private family matter. Gwen has committed a grave betrayal. We are asking her to leave." "You're asking a woman in uniform who just got off a 72-hour shift to leave the home she pays the mortgage on." Clara set the box of eggs down on the entryway table with a deliberate, heavy thud. She walked over to me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. The warmth of her palm was the first real comfort I'd felt in days. "Gwen, honey, pack Lily's diaper bag. We're going to my house." "She's not taking anything that belongs to this family," Valerie shouted. Stepping forward, I looked at Valerie, then Archie Caleb, and finally at Brenda. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, hot and stinging against my skin, and I didn't wipe it away. I let them see it. I wanted them to remember that I was human, that I was hurt, because people like Brenda only get careless when they think they've completely broken you. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice quiet, almost trembling. "I let the weakness show, but I will be back for my things." I picked up Lily's car seat. Claire grabbed my heavy military duffel bag, and together we walked out into the suffocating North Carolina heat, leaving the wolves to celebrate their temporary victory. If you've ever had to pack your entire life into the back of a sedan in 20 minutes, knowing that the people who promise to cherish you are inside celebrating your ruin, then you know the hollow, ringing silence that fills your ears. You don't feel angry yet. You just feel cold, even when the thermometer reads 95 degrees in the shade. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in Clara's kitchen. It was a modest, comforting space. The yellow linoleum floor was worn thin in front of the sink, and a ceramic cat clock hung on the wall, its tail ticking back and forth with a rhythmic, soothing click. Clara poured me a mug of hot chamomile tea, the steam rising between us. Lily was asleep in a portable crib in the corner, her chest rising and falling in perfect, peaceful intervals. I sat at the table, staring at my father's old zippered green canvas logbook. He had given it to me when I first enlisted. It had a small, tarnished brass padlock on the side, and the canvas was stained with a faint smudge of black engine oil from his workshop. "All right, Gwen," Clara said, pulling up a chair and sitting down beside me. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't tell me everything was going to be okay. She knew me too well for that. "Let's look at the paper. In our line of work, the truth isn't what people say. It's what they sign." I unzipped the logbook. Inside were my meticulously organized records. I keep copies of everything, every pay stub, every utility bill, every tax document, and every receipt for the renovations we did on the ranch. "First, the DNA test," I said, pulling out the photocopy of the document Caleb had slammed on the table. I didn't argue with them because I needed to verify the source. "Look at this." I pointed to the logo, *Apex Genetic Diagnostics, *. I pulled out my phone and opened the official registry of accredited clinical laboratories for the state of North Carolina. I typed in the name. Nothing came up. I searched the national registry. There is no accredited lab called Apex Genetic Diagnostics in this state, I whispered, a cold smile touching my lips. There is, however, a website called apex-diagnostics.com that sells novelty and prank medical certificates for $29. They use a template. All you have to do is type in the names and pay with a credit card. Clara leaned in, her reading glasses sliding down her nose, and the doctor's signature. Dr. Robert Vance? I looked him up on the drive over while you were driving, I said. Dr. Robert Vance is a registered veterinarian in Toledo, Ohio. He has never practiced human medicine, let alone genetic pathology. They literally scraped a real doctor's name from a public database to make the forgery look authentic to someone who doesn't know how to verify credentials. Clara let out a low whistle. Brenda always was a cheap woman who thought she was clever. But this is mail fraud by inducement and defamation. They used a falsified medical document to attempt to evict a tenant in a court. And that's just the beginning, I said, my heart starting to beat with a steady, cold purpose. The vulnerability was gone now, replaced by the precise, calculating mind of an Army warrant officer. Let's talk about the house. I pulled out the property records. This was Clara's specialty. The deed was in Caleb's grandfather's name, Clara explained, her fingers tracing the legal descriptions on the paper. When he died, the property was left to Caleb and his sister, Valerie, in probate. But they never paid the inheritance taxes, and the property sat in limbo. The county was preparing to foreclose on it for back taxes 3 years ago. Right? I said, and that's when I stepped in. I used my savings $50,000 from my deployment to Kawatu, pay off the back taxes, and settle the estate. I have the certified bank transfers right here. I tapped a plastic sleeve containing the receipt from the Cumberland County tax collector. But here's the catch, Clara said, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Because you used your VA loan to finance the subsequent remodel, the bank required Caleb to sign a deed of trust. He is on the mortgage, yes, but the loan is secured by your military benefits. And more importantly, look at the deed transfer from the probate court. She pulled a document from her own folder. She had run a quick search on the county database before leaving her office. Brenda and Valerie tried to file a quitclaim deed last month, Claire whispered. They tried to transfer Valerie's share of the property to Caleb, and then Caleb tried to transfer the entire property to a family trust controlled solely by Brenda. They did this while you were on your 3-day field exercise. I felt a chill run down my spine. Can they do that without my signature? Normally, no, Clara said, her voice dropping to a hard, dangerous register. But they submitted a power of attorney. A general power of attorney supposedly signed by you, Gwen, granting Caleb full authority to sign real estate transactions in your name while you were deployed. I stared at her. I never signed a general power of attorney. I only signed a limited medical power of attorney for Lily's health care in case of an emergency while I was overseas. It was drafted by the JAG office on base. I know, Clara said, which means the signature on this general power of attorney is a forgery. And because it was filed with the county registrar, it's a Class 1 felony in the state of North Carolina. Uttering a forged instrument. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. They hadn't just tried to kick me out because they didn't like me. This was a coordinated, calculated financial execution. Brenda wanted the house. She wanted the $50,000 of renovations I had paid for. She wanted the equity I had built with my sweat and my military service. And she was willing to brand my daughter as a bastard and forge my signature on federal and state documents to get it. I looked over at Lily, sleeping so peacefully. She had my father's nose and Caleb's chin. She was his child, and he knew it. But he was so weak, so entirely under his mother's thumb, that he was willing to deny his own blood just to secure a piece of property. He didn't have the grit to earn himself. If you've ever wondered how far greed can push people who claim to be family, I said, looking directly at Clara, this is the answer. They will tear down their own blood if it means they get to keep a pile of bricks. So, Clara said, leaning back and crossing her arms. What's the play, warrant officer? I closed the green canvas logbook. The brass lock clicked shut. In the military, we don't fire until we have a clear line of sight and the target is fully committed, I said, my voice dead calm. They think they've won. They think I'm sitting in some cheap motel room crying into a paper cup. We let them think that. We let them take the next step. We let them file the eviction notice. Clara smiled, a slow, dangerous expression that showed every one of her 58 years of county wisdom. And while they're doing that, While they're doing that, I said, I'm going to compile the packet. Every forged document, every bank record, every certified letter from the real Apex Diagnostics, and the original JAG power of attorney. I'm going to build a cage so tight they won't even realize they're inside it until I turn the key. I stood up, walking over to the window. Outside, the night was falling over the pines, the shadows stretching long and dark across the yard. I had spent my entire life working twice as hard for half as much, and I had never complained. But they had targeted my daughter. They wanted a fight. They just didn't realize they had challenged a woman who kept her receipts. The next morning, the smell of Clara's chicory coffee was the only thing that kept the coldness in my bones from settling permanently. I woke up on her pull-out sofa, the scratchy but clean floral sheets tucked up to my chin. Lily was still asleep in the portable crib nearby, her little chest rising and falling with a peaceful rhythm that felt completely foreign to the storm brewing in my chest. I sat at Clara's worn kitchen table, running my fingers over the deep grooves in the pine wood. My father had built a table just like this one. He used to say that you could tell the quality of a home by how many coffee rings were stained into the wood. It meant people actually sat down and talked to each other. On Brenda's pristine, white marble kitchen island, you weren't even allowed to set down a glass of water without a coaster shaped like a miniature Persian rug. You didn't sleep a wink, did you? Clara asked, setting a thick ceramic mug down in front of me. She was already dressed in her county clerk uniform, a pressed polyester blouse, and her trusty orthopedic sneakers. I slept enough to think, I said, taking a sip of the hot, bitter coffee. In my line of work, you don't need sleep. You just need a clear sequence of events. Well, the sequence is moving faster than we thought, Clara said, sliding a printout across the table. I ran a search on the county GIS database before I put the coffee on. Look at it. I looked. It was a pending title transfer for my house. Caleb and Brenda had already submitted the quitclaim deed to the county land registry. It was stamped pending verification. Because Clara knew the girls in the recording office, she had been able to flag it, but the gears of the local bureaucracy were already turning. They were trying to finalize the transfer before the week was out. They wanted the house entirely in Brenda's family trust before I even had time to consult a lawyer. They're moving fast because they think I'm broken, I said, my voice quiet and steady. They think a girl from the trailer park is going to hide in a motel room, cry herself to sleep, and sign whatever they put in front of her just to make the shame go away. I stood up, walking over to the small mirror hanging by Clara's front door. I looked at my reflection. My face was pale, the dark circles under my eyes heavy, but my uniform was immaculate. I spent 15 minutes checking the alignment of my ribbons and the sharp crease of my collar. When you wear the uniform of a United States Army warrant officer, you don't just represent yourself. You represent the standard. And today, the standard was going to be ironclad. I'm going to Fort Liberty, I told Clara, kissing the top of Lily's warm, soft head. I need to visit the legal assistance office. And then I have to play the part. If you've ever had to swallow your pride and pretend to be completely helpless when every single cell in your body is screaming to tear the walls down, then you know the bitter taste that sits in the back of your throat. But sometimes you have to let the enemy believe they've backed you into a corner. You have to let them get so comfortable in their victory that they start leaving the vault doors wide open. On our latte, I was sitting in a small, windowless office on post, the hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Across from me sat Captain Reynolds, a sharp-eyed JAG attorney who looked like he survived entirely on energy drinks and federal statutes. He was looking at the paperwork I had compiled in my green canvas logbook. Warrant Officer Miller, Captain Reynolds said, tapping his pen against the desk. Let me make sure I have this straight. Your husband and his mother used a novelty website to fabricate a DNA test to claim your child isn't his. Then, they used a forged general power of attorney to attempt a transfer of real property while you were on active duty status. Yes, sir, I said, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and they did so without my knowledge or consent, violating the Service Members' Civil Relief Act regarding foreclosure and eviction protections. Captain Reynolds let out a low, dangerous laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a prosecutor who had just been handed a slam-dunk case on a silver platter. They didn't just cross a line, Gwen. They jumped over it and set it on fire. Forging a service member's signature on a legal document while they are under military orders is a federal offense. And trying to evict you without a court order. The Department of Justice has an entire division that does nothing but tear landlords apart for doing exactly what your mother-in-law is trying to do. I don't want to just stop them, Captain, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I want the record to be absolutely clear. I want my daughter's name cleared of their slander, and I want my home back. Legally? Publicly? Then we let them commit, Reynolds said, leaning forward. Under the SCROT, they have to serve you with a formal notice to vacate. If they try to lock you out or move your things without a court-ordered eviction, they commit a Class 1 misdemeanor under state law and a federal violation. I'm going to draft a certified letter to the county registrar putting a legal hold on that pending deed transfer due to suspected fraud and active duty status. But we won't send it until they think the deal is done. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Caleb, asterisk. We're changing the locks on Friday. Gwen. Your trash from the closet is in the garage. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Mom says you can come get your personal clothes tomorrow morning, but don't touch anything else. Asterisk. I stared at the screen. The sheer arrogance of it made my stomach turn. They had already thrown my things in the garage. My military gear, my dad's old tools, Lily's baby blanket treated like garbage. What do I reply, sir? I asked Captain Reynolds. You play the victim, he said softly. You give them exactly what they expect from a young, scared mother with no resources. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed out the words. I hated myself for writing them, but I knew the payload would be worth the cost. Asterisk, please, Caleb. Lily needs her crib. Can I please just come get her toys and her clothes? Please don't do this to us. I don't have anywhere else to go. Asterisk. A minute later, the reply came back. It was brief. Asterisk. Tomorrow at 9. Don't be late. Mom will be there to supervise. I closed my eyes for a brief second, feeling the cold anger settle into a hard, dense ball in my chest. They took the bait, I said. The next morning, the North Carolina humidity was already thick enough to where by 8. I drove my old pickup truck down the gravel driveway of the ranch house I had spent 2 years sweating over. The flower beds I had planted with lavender and yellow marigolds were dry, the soil parched. Brenda's cream LeSabre was parked in the grass, the engine off, but she was sitting on the front porch swing. She was wearing a perfectly pressed linen pantsuit, sipping sweet tea from a plastic cup, looking like a plantation owner inspecting the fields. Valerie was standing by the open garage door, a clipboard in her manicured hand. I got out of the truck, wearing an old pair of jeans and a faded army t-shirt. I made sure my shoulders were slumped. I made sure my eyes looked red and tired. You're late, Brenda said as I walked up the steps. She didn't stand up. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the gravel. We don't have all day for this, Gwen. The new locks are being installed this afternoon. Where is Caleb? I asked, my voice small, thin. Caleb is at the hardware store doing actual work. Valerie snapped from the garage. Unlike people who spend their days playing soldier on the taxpayer's dime, come on, your boxers are in here. Don't go inside the house. You have no right to be in there anymore. I walked into the garage. The air was hot and smelled of gasoline and dust. There, stacked against the wall, were 4 cardboard boxers. My dad's old heavy diesel wrenches, the ones he had used to keep our family fed, were thrown carelessly into a plastic bucket, some of them already beginning to rust in the humid air. We kept the crib, Valerie said, tapping her pen against her clipboard. Since Caleb paid for the lumber for the remodel, we figured that's family property now. We'll use it when I have kids. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest. I had spent 3 weekends sanding that crib down by hand, so there wouldn't be any rough edges for Lily's small hands. But I didn't say a word. I just nodded, picking up the first heavy cardboard box. As I carried it to the bed of my truck, I passed the kitchen window. The blinds were open. Sitting on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker, was a stack of papers. Even from 10 feet away, I recognized the blue notary seal on the bottom page. It was the forged general power of attorney. They had left it right there, probably waiting for the courier to pick it up for the final filing. Valerie, I said, turning back toward the garage, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. Can you please check if Lily's white noise machine is in the hallway? She can't sleep without it, and I didn't see it in the boxers. Valerie groaned, rolling her eyes. Oh, for heaven's sake, Gwen. You're so helpless. Fine. Stay right here. Don't you dare step foot inside. The moment her back was turned and she disappeared into the hallway, I stepped quickly into the kitchen. My boots made no sound on the laminate. I didn't steal the paper. I knew better than that. If I took it, they would just claim I stole a draft and file a different copy. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I took 3 high-resolution photos of the document. I zoomed in on the signature, a clumsy, shaky imitation of my handwriting and the notary stamp. The notary stamp belonged to Linda S. Higgins. Linda Higgins was Brenda's best friend from the Cumberland County Garden Club. I knew her. She had been at our wedding, whispering to Brenda about how my family's clothes looked like they came from a clearance rack. Linda had used her official state notary seal to verify a signature she knew was forged. Witnessing a transaction where the principal wasn't even in the same zip code, I stepped back out of the kitchen just as Valerie returned, holding the small plastic white noise machine like it was a piece of hazardous waste. Here, she said, tossing it into the box on my hip. Now, take your things and get off our property. Thank you, I whispered, keeping my eyes low. I loaded the last box into the truck, my father's heavy tools clanking against the metal truck bed. I got into the driver's seat, the engine turning over with a loud, comforting rumble. As I backed down the driveway, I looked at Brenda through the windshield. She was still sitting on the porch, sipping her tea, her face wearing the smug, satisfied expression of a woman who believed she had successfully cleaned her family's bloodline of the trailer park girl. She thought she had taken my home, my dignity, and my daughter's name. She had no idea that as I drove away, my phone was already uploading the crystal-clear images of Linda Higgins, notary stamped directly to the North Carolina Department of the Secretary of State's Notary Enforcement Division, alongside a copy of my official military deployment orders showing I was 50 miles away on the day the document was allegedly signed in person. The silent execution had begun, and the first knot in the noose was already tied. The transition from a woman trying to save her marriage to a warrant officer executing a tactical counteroffensive is not a switch you flip lightly. It takes a conscious resetting of your ribs, a tightening of your jaw, and the absolute refusal to let your hand shake. On Friday morning, as I stood in front of the mirror in Clara's guest room, I spent 10 full minutes smoothing down the front of my operational camouflage pattern uniform. I aligned my rank insignia with surgical care. I wanted them to see the uniform. I wanted them to remember exactly who they had targeted, not just a tired mother, but a soldier sworn to protect and defend, even against enemies domestic. If you've ever had to walk back into a room full of people who think they've successfully buried you, you know this strange, icy peace that comes over you. You aren't running on anger anymore. Anger is messy. It makes you loud, and loudness makes you sloppy. No, what you want is the cold, quiet precision of a surgeon. You want to look them in the eye and let them realize, second by agonizing second, that they didn't bury youth, it just gave you high ground. Clara was waiting for me in the kitchen, her car keys already in her hand. She looked me up and down, and for the first time since this nightmare started, a fierce, proud smile broke across her weathered face. You look like a storm coming over the ridge, Gwen, she said, her voice low and steady. And believe me, those people don't have an umbrella. Is the deputy on his way? I asked, checking my green canvas folder one last time. Deputy Vance is meeting us at the end of the driveway, Clara confirmed, tapping her phone. He's got the emergency civil injunction Captain Reynolds secured yesterday afternoon, and I personally called Linda Higgins. I told her there was an urgent discrepancy with the county land registry and she needed to be at the house at 9 o'clock sharp to verify her notary seal. She sounded like she'd swallowed a bee. I took a deep, slow breath. Then, let's go finish this. When we pulled up the gravel driveway of my ranch house, the scene was exactly as I had anticipated. The wolves were already dividing the carcass. A white locksmith's van was parked near the garage, the high-pitched whine of a drill echoing through the humid morning air. On the front porch, Brenda was supervising. She was wearing a sky-blue linen dress, her gold charm bracelet clinking as she gestured to the locksmith. Caleb was leaning against the porch railing, holding a plastic cup of sweet tea, looking entirely pleased with himself. His sister, Valerie, was sitting on my porch swing, swinging her legs like a child on recess, and standing near the steps, looking nervous and checking her watch every 30 seconds, was Linda Higgins, holding her leather notary logbook close to her chest. As my pickup truck rumbled to a halt on the gravel, the drill stopped. The silence that fell over the yard was immediate, heavy, and thick with sudden tension. Brenda set her teacup down on the porch table with a sharp clack. "Gwen," she called out, her voice dripping with artificial pity, "I thought we made it clear that you were to stay off the property. The locks are being changed. Any remaining personal items will be shipped to your aunt's address. You have no legal right to be here." I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her. I opened my door and stepped out of the truck, my polished combat boots crunching loudly on the dry gravel. From the passenger side, Clara stepped out, her face a mask of administrative authority, and right behind us, a marked Cumberland County Sheriff's vehicle pulled into the driveway, its blue lights flashing once, twice, before the engine cut out. Deputy Vance, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense expression, stepped out of his cruiser. He kept his hand resting casually near his utility belt. Caleb's face went entirely white. He dropped his plastic cup, the brown liquid spilling across the wooden porch steps. "Gwen, what is this? Why did you bring the cops to my house?" "It's not your house, Caleb," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet of the pine trees, it carried like a rifle shot. And it never was. I walked up to the edge of the porch, stopping just 3 feet from where Brenda stood. She tried to maintain her regal posture, but I saw the slight tremor in her hands. I saw the way her eyes darted to the deputy, then to Clara, and finally to the green folder in my hand. "This is a private civil matter." Brenda hissed, her face flushed with a sudden, ugly red. "Deputy, this woman was evicted. She is trespassing on my family's property." "Actually, ma'am," Deputy Vance said, stepping up onto the first step of the porch, "I have a signed emergency civil injunction here from the Cumberland County District Court. It states that Warrant Officer Gwen Miller is the primary resident and co-owner of this property, and any attempt to lock her out or transfer the title without a formal court order is a violation of state law and the Civil Relief Act. Locksmith, I'm going to need you to pack up your tools and step away from that door right now." The locksmith didn't need to be told twice. He gathered his drills and brass lock sets, muttering under his breath, and practically ran to his van. "This is ridiculous," Valerie screamed, jumping up from the swing. "She cheated on my brother. We have the DNA proof. She brought a bastard into our family and we have the right to protect our home." I looked at Valerie, then turned my gaze slowly to Caleb. "Let's talk about that DNA proof." "Caleb," I said softly. I opened my green folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "I have here a certified declaration from the North Carolina Board of Medical Examiners, alongside a direct letter from the corporate counsel of Apex Diagnostics, the Rio Medical Company, not the novelty website you used." I stepped closer, holding the paper up so Caleb could see it. "This document confirms that Apex Genetic Diagnostics is a fraudulent entity. The website you used to generate that PDF is a novelty prank site registered in Belize, and the signature at the bottom, Dr. Robert Vance. He is a retired veterinarian from Toledo, Ohio, who has never performed a human genetic test in his life." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the porch. Linda Higgins took a step back, her eyes wide with terror. "You paid $29 on our joint Visa card when I pay the balance on every month to purchase a fake certificate to brand your own daughter as illegitimate," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt heavier than a physical blow. "You stood in my living room, in front of your family, and denied your own blood. You did it because you were too weak to stand up to your mother and too lazy to pay for the house you wanted to steal." "Gwen, Caleb stammered, his eyes darting frantically to Brenda. Mom said we needed to protect the hardware store's assets," she said. "Shut up, Caleb," Brenda snapped, her composure completely shattering. "She's bluffing. It doesn't matter about the DNA test. We have the deed. The quitclaim deed was signed and notarized. The property is in the Miller family trust. Now, you signed the power of attorney, Gwen. You gave Caleb the right to transfer your share, and there is nothing you can do about it. I turned my head slowly toward Linda Higgins. Linda, I said, my voice gentle, almost conversational. How long have you been in notary public for the state of North Carolina? Linda swallowed hard, her knuckles white around her logbook. 10. 10 years, Gwen. Then, I continued, taking a step toward her, that under North Carolina General Statute, Chapter 10, a notary public commits a Class I felony if they knowingly notarize a forged signature, or if they perform a notarial act when the principal is not physically present before them. Linda's voice squeaked. I have here my official military deployment logs from Fort Liberty, I said, pulling another set of documents from the folder. On October 14th, the day you stamped and signed this general power of attorney, claiming, I appeared before you in Cumberland County, I was locked in a secure tactical operations center 50 miles away on a simulated exercise. My phone was checked into a security locker. My commander has signed this affidavit confirming I did not leave the base for 72 hours. Linda, Brenda warned, her voice rising to a screech. Don't say a word to her. I also have the security footage from the county administration building, Clara added, stepping forward with a grim smile, showing you, Brenda, and Caleb walking into the clerk's office with the document already signed. You didn't know the girl behind the counter was my niece, did you, Brenda? She remembers you. She remembers how eager you were to get that stamp. Linda Higgins broke. She dropped her logbook, the leather cover hitting the wooden porch with a dull thud. Tears began to stream down her face, ruining her heavy makeup. I'm sorry, Gwen. I'm so sorry, Linda sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Brenda told me you agreed to it. She said you were overseas and you wanted Caleb to handle the house. She said it was just a formality. I didn't know it was a forgery. Please, don't let them take my notary commission. I have grandbabies. Gwen, you notarized the fraudulent transfer of a service member's primary residence while she was on duty. Linda, Deputy Vance said, his voice cold and official. That's not a discrepancy. That's a felony. I'm going to need you to step down off the porch and stand by my cruiser. Linda began to wail, her loud, hysterical sobs echoing through the pine trees as she stumbled down the steps, completely ignoring Brenda's furious glares. I looked back at Caleb. He was shaking. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, but I could see his shoulders trembling. He looked like the small, frightened boy he had always been underneath the expensive boots in the family name. Gwen, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please, we can talk about this. We can fix this. I looked at him, and for a brief second I felt a deep, profound sadness. Not for the loss of our marriage that had died the moment he slammed that fake paper on the table, but for the father he could have been to Lily. If only he had possessed an ounce of the courage my own father had carried in his grease-stained overalls. There is nothing to fix, Caleb, I said, my voice steady, clear, and absolute. You wanted a public execution. You wanted to throw me and my daughter out into the dirt. But you forgot one thing. I reached into my folder and pulled out the final document, the certified copy of the bank transfers showing my $50,000 in renovation funds, alongside the original Jagade-drafted medical power of attorney. You forgot that I keep the receipts, I said, and today the bill is due. The silence that followed my words was so thick you could hear the cicadas buzzing in the sweet gum trees at the edge of the yard. Brenda stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, the high and mighty expression on her face melting like cheap candle wax in the North Carolina heat. For a woman who had spent her entire life using her family's modest local status as a shield, looking directly into the barrel of a felony investigation was a completely foreign experience. Linda, Brenda barked, her voice cracking as she tried to reclaim her authority. Get back up here. Don't you say another word to these people. We have a lawyer. But Linda Higgins wasn't listening. She was already sobbing by the hood of the sheriff's cruiser, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her car keys. She knew what a notary commission was worth, and she knew what happened to respectable church-going women in Cumberland County who signed their names to fraudulent real estate transfers. When Deputy Vance opened the back door of his vehicle, she slid inside without a fight, her head bowed in complete, ruinous shame. I turned back to Caleb. He looked like he was about to throw up. He was staring at the ground, his eyes darting from the spilled sweet tea on the porch steps to the polished black leather of my combat boots. "When," he whispered, his voice cracking, "we can talk about this, please? You don't have to do this to my family." "Your family did this to my daughter, Caleb," I said, my voice dead calm, though my chest felt hollow and cold. "The moment you slammed that fake piece of paper on my table and called my child a bastard, you chose your side. I'm just showing you the consequences of that choice." Over the next 6 months, the high and mighty Miller family learned exactly what happens when you try to run a scam on a United States soldier. Because I was on active duty, the Service Members Civil Relief Act protected me from their predatory eviction attempt. But the state of North Carolina was far less forgiving about the forgery. Linda Higgins, desperate to keep herself out of a state penitentiary, turned state's evidence within 48 hours. She handed the district attorney every single text message Brenda had sent her, complete with instructions on how to stamp the power of attorney while I was away on field training. Faced with felony charges of uttering a forged instrument, notary, fraud, and conspiracy, Brenda's expansive defense lawyers quickly realized they had no cards left to play. To keep his mother and himself out of prison, Caleb signed a consent decree. He waived any and all claims to the house, acknowledging under oath that the $50,000 of my own savings I had invested in the property constituted a primary ownership stake. The court voided the fraudulent deed transfer, restoring the property entirely to my name. But the victory wasn't cheap, and it wasn't clean. The Vanderbilts of the Sandhills had to liquidate their flagship hardware store in Fayetteville to pay for Brenda's legal defense, the civil damages my attorney secured for fraud, and the back taxes they had tried so hard to dodge. The proud sign that had read Miller's Hardware since 1978 was taken down, replaced by a generic corporate logo. If you're sitting at your own kitchen table tonight, looking at a stack of bills or a text message that makes your stomach drop, I want you to take a deep breath. I know some of you are doing this exact math right now, wondering if you have the strength to stand up to the people who are supposed to love and protect you. I want you to know that you do. The paper doesn't lie, but neither does your worth. You don't have to scream. You don't have to throw things. You just have to gather your receipts, keep your head down, and let them walk right into the cage they built for themselves. The day I finally moved back into the ranch house, the air was cool and crisp with the arrival of autumn. Clara helped me carry the boxers back inside from her truck. The house smelled of fresh paint and pine cleaner. I spent the evening in Lily's nursery, sitting on the hardwood floor with a sheet of fine grit sandpaper. I was working on her Cribda 1 Valerie had tried to keep out of spite. I ran my fingers over the smooth, pale pine, making sure there wasn't a single rough edge left to scrape my daughter's fingers. I won't lie to you and tell you I felt like a hero. Done. I sat on the floor of that half-empty room, surrounded by my father's old heavy diesel wrenches and my daughter's stuffed animals, and I cried until my chest ached. I cried for the girl from the trailer park who had believed that marrying into a respectable family meant she would finally have a safe place to land. I cried for the years I had spent working double shifts, sending money home to a man who was busy forging my name to steal the roof over our daughter's head. But when I wiped my face on my sleeve, the tears were gone, and what was left was the solid, quiet foundation of my own life. I had built this house. I had paid for the wood, the nails, and the land. My daughter would grow up knowing that her mother didn't run when the wolves came to the door. A year later, the pine trees around the Hope Mills Park were dropping their long, yellow needles onto the grass. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where the air smells of wood smoke and dried leaves. Lily was now running around the playground in a pair of denim overalls and tiny pink sneakers, her brown curls bouncing as she chased a butterfly. I sat on a wooden bench, a thermos of black coffee between my hands. From the gravel path, I heard the sound of footsteps. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. I had memorized the cadence of his walk over 5 years of marriage. Caleb walked up to the edge of the grass. He looked different now. The expensive leather boots were gone, replaced by a worn pair of work shoes. He was working 40 hours a week behind the counter of a competitor SC lumberyard, living in a small rented apartment on the highway, his mother's bitter shadow still hanging heavy over his life. The arrogance was entirely gone from his shoulders, replaced by the quiet, heavy stoop of a man who had finally realized the true cost of his weakness. He stopped 10 feet from the bench, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. "Hi, Gwen," he said, his voice quiet. "Caleb," I nodded, keeping my hands wrapped around my warm thermos. He looked over at Lily, who was currently trying to climb the steps of the plastic slide, her little tongue sticking out in concentration. A soft, painful look crossed his face, the look of a man staring at a treasure he had thrown into the river because his mother told him it was common dirt. "She's getting big," he murmured. "She looks like your dad." "She has his eyes," I said. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, roughly carved wooden duck. It wasn't perfect. The edges were slightly uneven, and the yellow paint was a little thin in places. It was the kind of toy a man makes with a pocket knife and a block of pine when he doesn't have any money left for the store-bought kind. I made this for her," he said, holding it out with a hand that trembled slightly. "For her birthday. I know I'm behind on the child support this month, Gwen. The legal fees we're still paying them off. But I wanted her to have something." I looked at the wooden toy. I looked at Caleb's tired, lined face. I could have told him to take his toy and get lost. I could have called the sheriff, or reminded him of the restraining order we had settled during the divorce. I had every legal and moral right to shut the door in his face and never let him see her again. But as I looked at my daughter, laughing as she slid down the plastic chute into the dry leaves, I remembered my own father. I remembered his greasy hands, his tired eyes, and the way he had worked himself to death just to make sure I had school shoes. He had been a flawed man, but he had loved me with every single ounce of his broken body. "Set it on the bench, Caleb," I said softly. He blinked, a sudden spark of hope rising in his eyes. He stepped forward, placed the wooden duck gently on the wood beside my thermos, and then stepped back, maintaining the distance we both knew he had earned. "I'm not going to keep her from knowing who you are," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "But you need to understand something. The court-ordered visits are supervised, and they stay supervised. You don't bring your mother, and you don't bring your sister. If I hear one word, just one about Lily not being a part of your family, you will never see her face again. Do you understand me?" "I understand, Gwen," he whispered, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I swear I do." "Then you can sit on the other end of the bench for 15 minutes, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "She's learning how to count to 10. You can help her." He sat down, keeping his distance, his face filled with a quiet, devastating gratitude. He didn't try to touch my hand. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew that some things are too broken to ever be glued back together, and that a lukewarm peace was the best he could ever hope for. I watched him from the end of the bench, my daughter, my former husband, and the small wooden toy sitting between us. I had lost the dream of the big, warm family I had always wanted. But as the autumn wind stirred the dry pine needles around my boots, I knew that what I had built instead was something far better. I had built a life on the truth. I had protected my father's memory, my daughter's future, and my own dignity. Love is a gift, not a line item in a budget. And sometimes, the quietest strength of all is knowing how to protect that gift, even when you have to build the walls yourself out of nothing but sweat, receipts, and the courage to stand your ground.